right. Welcome, everyone. Today I am joined by Dr. Marianne Matzo. Welcome.
Thank you
Thank you
for
for
having me.
joining. Yeah, of course. And we're going to be talking about a topic that I really don't know a lot about. So I'm very interested, and I'm sure a lot of our audience probably doesn't know a lot about it either. We're going to be chatting about artificial foods and fluids and their place in senior care. So we'll get started here in a second. I see some of you trickling in. I see a comment from someone named Simone. Hello. Thank you for joining us. If you're here with us, feel free to drop a hello. And you can also join in the conversation at any point during this live stream if you have questions or just any thoughts about the things that we're talking about. But we'll get started here in just a second.
Great.
All right, seeing a few more people trickle in. Welcome. Thank you for joining. All right. Looks like we have a few faces here, so we will go ahead and get started. If this is your first time attending a seniorliving.org live stream, my name is Taylor Schumann, and I am the editor and senior tech expert at Senior Living. And I am joined by the wonderful Dr. Marianne Matzo. She's one of our experts, and we're going to be having a Q&A today on artificial foods and fluids, which is such an important topic, and I think it's just not talked about a lot. And so I'm very excited to dive in to learn a lot and just to chat with you all about this. So before we get started, I am going to give you a little background on Dr. Marianne. She is a distinguished expert in palliative care and a certified gerontological nurse practitioner with a career dedicated to caring for older adults, improving end-of-life care, and education. She's a retired tenured professor of nursing with extensive experience as a hospice and palliative care nurse. She has authored numerous publications, including the first U.S. palliative care nursing textbooks. She's a funded researcher, and she's a fellow of the American Academy of Nursing. And since retiring, she has founded Everyone Dies, which is an amazing nonprofit organization that's dedicated to educating the public regarding serious illness, dying, and bereavement through weekly podcasts and a children's book. So welcome, Marianne.
Thank you for having me. It's good to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you'd like to learn more about Everyone Dies, it has so many wonderful resources. It's a super great podcast and organization. So you can feel free to scan this QR code if you want to learn more. And with that, we will go ahead and get started with our Q&A. So as I said, if there are any new faces in the chat today, we are talking about artificial foods and fluids. So Dr. Marianne, could you first tell me, maybe like a little bit of the history around this topic? How do we decide who uses artificial fluids? And I know that there's some controversy surrounding it. So do you want to just kind of set the stage for us?
That's a really good question. So the controversy about it really goes back to 1975. So it's been about 50 years that we've been dealing with these questions about when to use artificial food and fluids. And the first case that had anything to do with this was Karen Ann Quinlan, who was a young woman who was in a persistent vegetative state, which means that her brain wasn't working, but it was working enough so that she could breathe, and her heartbeat and those kinds of autonomic things were working. So she was on a ventilator, which meant that she had a machine that breathed for her, and she was given feeding tubes, which means that they put, back in 75, they'd have a tube that would go down your nose, and there would be a bag of artificial nutrition. It wasn't, ground up pizza or anything. It was artificial nutrition that fed into her. And that's what kept her alive, was the ventilator to breathe for her and this bag of fluids to give her food, artificial food. And so the family, once, they realized that she wasn't going to wake up, requested that she be removed from the ventilator. But the hospital said, we're not going to do that because that would kill her. And so her father, Mr. Quinlan, took the case to the New Jersey Supreme Court. And what the New Jersey Supreme Court did is that they made Karen's father her guardian. She was over 21. So usually, somebody who's over 21 doesn't have a guardian. But because she couldn't speak for herself, they made her father her guardian. And so as her guardian, he could say, Karen wouldn't want to be kept alive on this, artificial food and fluids. And so, or yes, the artificial food and fluids, because that was considered, at that time to be something that was just going to keep her alive. And so, but the thing is that there was this machine that was breathing for her. And that they considered, or her father considered, to be something like, that's not necessary. If she can't breathe for herself, then there shouldn't be a machine that's going to do it. So he made the decision to have her removed from the breathing machine, the ventilator, but he kept the artificial food and fluids because at that time, and the way of thinking was, well, I don't want my daughter to starve to death. And so they're brought into this discussion, which the piece that's important is that there was what was considered ordinary care and what was considered extraordinary care. And in this case, in 1975, the feeding tube was considered ordinary care. And the ventilator to breathe for her was considered extraordinary care. Therefore, he asked that it be removed. And in fact, she started breathing on her own. Maybe enough of the nerves healed. And it took her, I think, another, 5 years or something before she actually died. But they kept her on that feeding tube. Then fast forward, or not so fast forward, to Nancy Cruzan was the next big case. And that was in 1983. Now, she was also in a persistent vegetative state. She wasn't on a ventilator, though, but she was on the feeding tubes. She had this external way that she was being fed. The family wanted the feeding tube removed, saying that Nancy never would have wanted anything like that. Now, she was in the Missouri Rehabilitation Center, and that rehabilitation center said, we're not taking away her food. And that's a horrible way to die. They're just, no, we're not taking that away. Well, it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And what happened was, what was said was that there was a call for what they called clear and convincing evidence. And that's the standard that we are now held to, is that there must be clear and convincing evidence that the person who you want to release from the ventilator or release from the feeding tube, there has to be evidence that that's what they wanted. Sometime in their life, they would have had to say, if I'm ever like this, don't ever do this to me. Or go to see a movie and see somebody who's on a feeding tube and say, oh, no, I don't want anything like that. And what the Cruzan case did is that really it called for what we call now an advance directive or a living will. That came out of the Cruzan case in 1983, where it was said that people should be able to, in advance of needing to make a decision like this, be able to write down, I would want artificial food and fluids. I would not want this. These are the things I do or do not want. So those were the two sort of landmark cases that put us in the position of saying people should have a living will. There should be a way to communicate what of the technology that we have, what is it you want to use? Because just because we have technology doesn't mean that it's the best for every person and for every situation. So those are the cases that kind of set the stage to talk about what is it that people want if they're not able to speak for themselves. What is it that you would want?
That's so interesting to think about how that precipitated advanced care directives, because that's such an important part of end of life care. So now that we kind of know the history and the background, could you just explain maybe how artificial foods and fluids work?
Sure. So, and just back to the history part of it, these were both Cruzan and Karen Ann were both 20-something year. They were over 21, but not much. So these were both young people. So a lot of times when we think about like advanced directives or living will, it's like, oh, I'm not old enough or sick enough to need that. Well, neither was Karen Ann or Nancy. These
Mhm.
were young 20s people. And so these kinds of things are for anybody who's alive who might, in whatever situation they're in, say, I would or would not want this. And if you have a feeling about that, you really should have an advance directive.
Mm.
So when it comes to filling that out, then if you say, well, artificial food and fluids, what is that? So it's when, like anything that you can eat, chew, and swallow is not artificial food and fluids. I mean, some of the things we eat are artificial, but
Yeah.
we're eating them ourselves. But if you're in a situation where you can't chew and swallow for yourself, and there's maybe a temporary something going on, or they're not sure if you're going to wake up, or you're really, really sick, and let's say you're having breathing problems, and they put a trach in, and you're on a ventilator. Well, you're not going to be eating in those situations because you can't, because they put you in what they call a medically induced coma. You're not awake to do that. But the body has to stay alive. So what they'll do is they'll put in an IV. Now, typically we get our IVs like here. Sometimes if it's just for a little while, they'll put it here. Well, what they do for these long-term things is that they put a port in, and they put it here into a big vein that'll go into the heart for the IVs and that kind of thing. And then they put a different kind of tube in to give what are called tube feedings. And if you've ever been to a hospital or a nursing home and you've seen a bag hanging that's not clear stuff, that's artificial food. And then the IV stuff, the clear liquids that they give, like if you get dehydrated, that's artificial fluids. So it's really easy kind of to know, because if you're taking it in yourself through your mouth, that's not artificial. If it's going in from a bag, that's artificial.
Mm.
Now, that technology is there to keep people alive through really serious illness, and that works great for that. But then it was adopted to say, well, grandpa can't swallow anymore, or when he swallows, he tends to kind of aspirate and the fluid goes into his lungs and he gets a pneumonia. And we don't want him to starve to death. So can you just put a tube in and keep him alive? So back in the 70s and 80s and going forward, that was kind of the thing that was done. And so you would have people in a nursing home who would have a major stroke, couldn't talk, couldn't walk, couldn't move. They were literally a body in the bed, and they were being kept alive by artificial food and fluids. And as a young nurse, when I graduated nursing school in 1978, that was part of our job, was to go around and go hang the bag of the Ensure, whatever it was that people were being given to keep them alive. And people started to look at that and say, is that what this was made for? The other piece of it is that people would get, it would back up if they were getting it like through the nose with, that kind of tube feeding. It could back up and people would aspirate it and get a pneumonia. So then we would treat the pneumonia with, the big guns antibiotics, and, sort of wash, rinse, repeat, do it again. Because when you've got fluids going in other places that, they're not meant to, you still can get that aspiration pneumonia is what it's called. And if it's untreated, a person becomes septic and dies. But back in those days, we said, well, that's, when we talked about Karen Ann Quinlan of ordinary versus extraordinary, nothing was extraordinary. Antibiotics weren't considered extraordinary. And, those tube feedings weren't considered extraordinary, because we can't let somebody starve to death. Well, but as time went on and we were using those technologies, what we found was that it was more of a burden than a benefit on people because of the ongoing pneumonias and being sick with that, and then the antibiotics that are being given, and the fact that they were a body in the bed. There was no hope of meaningful survival. They were never going to stand up and walk and be able to do anything. And so people would look, back in those days, they would look and they would say, God, if I'm ever like that, don't do that to me. Well, then that begs the question, why are we doing it to them?
Mm.
Why are we doing it to dad if you wouldn't want that? Or healthcare practitioners would say, well, I certainly would never want that. And we would say, well, do we know that they would want that? But we didn't, because nobody had asked before, or we never even said, do you think that this is what they would want?
Mm.
So we were doing this intervention at the request of the family without any really clear knowledge of what does this person want.
Mm. Yeah, that makes it such a difficult decision, especially if you don't have that advanced care directive. So as families are looking at this, and you touched on this a bit, but maybe do you want to clearly just define who is most likely to be helped by artificial foods and fluids and who is least likely or may want to avoid that?
So the person who benefits from that, who is the person who has a chance of a meaningful survival. So if somebody is in a persistent vegetative state, there is no chance of meaningful survival. They will never get up and walk. They will never be able to love a person or communicate with a person. They are, and I hate to characterize people as a body in the bed, but I don't really know how else to sort of get that idea across. They can't do anything. They can't talk. They don't know that you're there, that you're not there. And so you look at it and you say, can this person survive? So let's say you're a motorcycle rider and you've had a terrible motorcycle accident. And they wire your jaw closed and you've got every broken bone. Well, your brain, maybe you're smart enough to wear your helmet. Your brain, if there was no brain damage, so you will survive. And there is a chance of meaningful survival. And so we're going to keep you alive. We're going to keep you alive to give you the chance to say, sort of, here's the result of your accident. Once everything's healed and once everything's okay, and you're awake and you can say, all right, this is how I am, then you can make a decision. Now, let's say you had that motorcycle accident and broke every bone in your body, and now everything's healed, but you really can't chew and swallow anymore. And so you're going to have to be on a liquid diet for the rest of your life. You can say, I don't want to live like this. I refuse any artificial nutrition. There are people who are facing the end of life from other diseases, from cancer or other diseases, who might say, I don't want to prolong how long I'm on this earth with the disease that I have. And so I am not going to eat and I am not going to drink. And I do not give you permission to put artificial food and fluids into me. And so as that began happening, we could then study, well, what is it like to die without artificial food and fluids? Do you really starve to death? Because we're healthy people. And we think, you want me to go 10 minutes without my water next to me? No, that's not going to happen. I have to have fluids. Or I have to eat every 2 hours or I'm just so cranky. Don't even talk to me about not being able to eat. So we look at it from healthy people, from a healthy point of view. But when these people were making decisions to say, I'm not going to eat and drink anymore, I'm going to just let myself die, we can't force somebody to have artificial food and fluids. So, but we could say, well, let me go with you on this journey and see how it is for you. So what we found was that it's really not bad. In fact, because your body is sick in the first place, when you stop taking in fluids and you stop taking in food, your body's in this process of shutting down. And in reality, the last thing your body wants at that point is another job to do. So think about digestion as a job that has to be done. Breathing is a job. The heart pumping is a job. The body says, I got to keep the heart pumping because if I don't, this person's going to die. And I have to keep the lungs working because if I don't, this person's going to die. But they don't really need to eat, And there's this mechanism built in within our bodies that when we are sick and not eating and not drinking, the body starts to produce these natural opioids. So in addition to the body not wanting it, is that there's these natural opioids that are so that you're comfortable, you're not in pain. If you get a dry mouth because you're a mouth breather or something, you can brush your teeth. You could take little sips of water that aren't enough to support life, but are enough to keep you comfortable. And people die in a very comfortable way. And it was like, well, this is new information. But if you think about it, before we had artificial food and fluids, people have been dying for centuries in a very comfortable way. Because before, probably maybe World War II, there was no other way to get artificial food and fluids into people. So this is what occurred. And we found that, yes, it's a comfortable way. We can manage the symptoms of a dry mouth, but with good mouth care. But you don't feel like you want any food. The idea of food is just like, ick. And, as working as a hospice nurse and being with many people who've died, the last thing on their minds is food. And so what families try to do is they try to say, well, don't you want a little bite of chocolate or don't you want a little of this? They say, yeah, I'll have a bite. And they'll have a bite and they'll say, that was good. That was enough. So it's not enough to support life. It's what we in the business call recreational eating. And some people spend their whole lives doing recreational eating, but at the end of life, it's truly recreational. Oh, that smells good. I'll have a bite of that pizza, but I don't want to look at any more than that. And families will, because they don't know this, what I'm telling you, is they'll put this huge dish of food in front of them. And the person goes, oh, like that's just too overwhelming. Like if you put one cookie, I'd have a bite of that. But all of this, I don't even want. Because there's just that mechanism has been turned off because the body is going into its natural decline. It was built to die a certain way, and it was built to release these natural opioids and to make it be a comfortable kind of thing. And that we don't need to interfere with that in order for people to be comfortable through their death.
Wow, I did not know any of that. That is so interesting in how the body works as it, kind of approaches the end of life. So that just really broke down, a common misconception of that you're starving someone if you would decide not to provide artificial foods and fluids. Are there any other common misconceptions or misunderstandings you see when you're educating people about end-of-life care when it comes to feeding and hydration?
Well, like I said, we look at it from our own point of view. And so, like, I'm Italian. My way of nurturing is to feed you. If I love you, I feed you. And I send you home with food. And that's my perspective. But then you have to look at, well, if this person is at the end of life, what is it that they really want? And it's a burden when we're forcing food on people because they don't want to hurt your feelings. They don't want to say, will you just get out of my face? But I learned at being a hospice nurse, the person I was there to visit to take care of, would be generally in the living room in their lazy boy chair, because that's 9 out of 10 people. That's how they like to do it. And I'd go in the kitchen and wash my hands, and the family member would be there. And they'd say, they'd corner you, I mean, this is just sort of a typical way things go. And people would say, you really got to talk to them. They refuse to eat anything. And, they're going to starve to death. And, I cook all his favorite foods, and he'll take a bite, and that's it. And then I go in the living room to see the patient, and they'll say, come here, will you tell them to leave me alone about the food? I don't want to insult them. I appreciate that they're cooking. I just don't want it. So you've got, like these two conversations going on. And so what I would say is, hey, let's all talk here a minute. Is it okay if I tell her what you just told me? And then talk about, here's what's going on. Here's what the body needs. And yes, you want to nurture him. Let's just use the gender roles. You want to nurture him. You want to give him his favorite things. And that's great. That's nice. But no, his body doesn't really want it. And if, the body doesn't want it, then your brain doesn't want it. He's perfectly comfortable. And if all he takes is a bite of it, then that's okay. That's how much he wants. And it's nice. It's great that you made his favorite cookie or whatever it is, but just know. And my sister was dying from cancer, and I went to go visit her, and we were going through my mom's old cookbook that, were all handwritten, and it was, Mrs. Gotch's this and Mrs. Zink's this, the people in our neighborhood who had given my mom recipes. And I said to my sister, I said, we're like the last people who know who these people are and what their recipes were. And we're going through and we're talking about food. And we get to this tomato soup cake, which sounds really gross, but it was really good. That our mom used to make. We used to love when she made tomato soup cake. And I said, do you want me to make you a tomato soup cake? She said, yeah, that would be good. Now, I know all this stuff. I know she's probably not going to eat much of it. But we talked through the whole making of it, and she could smell it. And, it was like a whole afternoon thing to make tomato soup cake. And I gave her, I said, you ready to try it? And she says, just a small piece. I gave her a real small piece because I know like a big piece is overwhelming. And she took one bite and she said, that was good. And that's all she wanted. And that's all she ate. And I don't know if anybody else ate tomato soup cake because it's sort of good, but it's not that good. But we thought it was when we were kids. So you just have to know that you're going to put in an afternoon of making something for someone and they're going to eat a bite. But that bite, they're going to like. They're going to enjoy. It's going to feel good. But they're not going to want any more. And you can't be annoyed at them because they won't eat your food. It's not about that.
Yeah.
So you as the person who's feeding, you have to manage your expectations that they're not going to eat a lot. And that if they eat more than one bite, that's pretty good. And that the person who's at the end of their life should be in a position to feel guilty because they don't want to eat, because that's what their body's doing right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. And like you said, it's not at that point, it's not really about the food. Like you guys were able to share these great memories and kind of talk about, your childhood. And that must have been so fulfilling for her as well. So it's because it doesn't look the way we would want it to look, doesn't mean that it's wrong.
Right. And that's the thing that's important is that, when women are having a baby, there's things that they do because that's what their body says to do. People at all different points of us, there's things that we want, things that we don't want. If you have a think about like when you have a really bad cold and you're all snuffy and you can't smell anything and you say, oh, I just don't really want to eat, because our smell is part of what makes us want to eat. And when we don't feel well, we don't really feel like eating. Think of how you'd feel if somebody was like, you don't love me if you don't eat my tomato soup cake. No, it's like, don't even talk to me about that now. Rub my feet or something to make me feel better. Don't try to do that.
Totally. Well, you can tell it's definitely a divisive topic among families. And I would say, I'm assuming even, say an uncle and an aunt have differing opinions about what to do about the mom or whatever that might be. If families are feeling divided about whether or not to start artificial feeding or stop it, what advice would you give, or how would you approach that as a healthcare provider to help guide that conversation?
Well, so the first question is the person who's at the end of their life, do they want to be kept alive with artificial food and fluids? Some people will say, absolutely, whatever you can do so that I can have another minute on this earth, do it. Because there are people who are like that. And then there are people who say, I don't want that. If I can't go shopping at Target, I don't want to live. So don't do anything that's going to keep me around any longer. So that's the first conversation to have, is while you're still healthy, think about it. What do I want? What's ordinary for me and what's extraordinary for me? Do I want to be on a ventilator? Do I want to be resuscitated and then put on a ventilator? Because that's how it goes. Do I want artificial food and fluids to keep my body alive while I'm not here anymore, when my body can't function anymore? Or it used to be like back in the day that people with Alzheimer's disease were all hooked up to artificial food and fluids, because the sequelae, what happens in the course of having Alzheimer's disease, is you get to the point where you can't swallow anymore. And so when that would happen back in the 70s and 80s, they would drop a feeding tube and feed them that way. And so the disease would continue to progress, but we would be keeping the body alive because the family didn't want that person to die, or didn't want that person to starve to death in the process of their dying. And in fact, there was that TV show with Noah Wiley, the one in the ER. What was the name of it? Do you remember?
Oh, I can't remember.
It was really a good show. It was the first season this last year. Well, they had this scenario where it was an older man who had said he didn't want artificial food and fluids. And the daughter was like, but you can't just let him starve. You have to do this. And Noah Wiley's character was like, but he said clearly he didn't want it. And this guy was no longer able to speak for himself. And the daughter said, I'm his durable power of attorney. You have to do what I say.
Wow.
I know I'm going against what he wants, but you have to do what I say. And as much as he talked with her and explained it to her, she was like, no, I'm not ready for him to die yet. And so they started the artificial food and fluids. And so that's about our issues, and not about doing what the person who's chosen us to make decisions for them, if they can't, doing for them what they've asked us to do. And I got off track. I forgot what your story.
Oh, that's okay. I was just asking if families are divided about what advice you'd give.
Right. So have a conversation in advance. Pick your durable power of attorney who's going to do what you want to do, which brings me back to the thing I always say is, I really don't recommend you choosing your spouse or your children, because their emotional investment gets in the way of them doing for you what you want. If what you want is that you don't want resuscitation and you don't want artificial food and fluids or those kinds of interventions. It's really hard for families to say no to those things. It's hard because they love you. So my thing is, you can pick somebody who loves you, just not like who's going to. The thing is that spouses and your children then spend the rest of their life thinking they killed you. How do I know that? Because people tell me, like I'll be sitting on a plane and if they hear that I'm a nurse, they'll say to me, "You'll like this story. I killed my mother." And I think, well, I mean, unless I'm sitting next to a serial killer, you didn't kill your mother. And how can I not say, well, tell me about that?
Mm-hmm.
I'll say, well, I had to make the decision where, we weren't going to, continue to give her IVs or any food. And then how do you not then educate somebody who's sitting next to you who's carrying this tremendous guilt because they killed their mom? How do you not say, well, let's kind of talk about that. Did your mom say she didn't want these things? Yeah, no, she didn't want those things. So you did what your mom wanted you to do, what she asked you to do, what she trusted you to do. Yeah. Then how did you kill her?
Mm.
If you do for a loved one what they've entrusted you to do, that's your oath. That's the promise you made to them that you would do that. And if you don't do that, that's way worse than if you do it. To say, I don't care what they wanted, give them the IVs, give them the antibiotics they said they didn't want, give them, the artificial food that they said they didn't want, because it's not about them, it's about me. That's what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
You can make your own decisions for yourself and pick your own durable power of attorney to make decisions for you. And you're going to want them to do what you've told them to do. Like I tell my family, I will haunt you for the rest of your life if you don't do what I'm telling you to do. And hopefully I will have that capability if they don't. But, you don't need to carry a guilt of killing somebody who's asked you not to do something.
Mm.
The other thing that I tell people is that it's a lot harder to stop something than it is not to just start it in the first place. So people will say, well, oh my God, they're having trouble breathing. And, I know that they have end-stage lung cancer, but can't you just put them on the ventilator for just like a day and we'll see how it goes? Well, yes, we can put them on for a day. Is that what they wanted? No, that wasn't what they wanted. But because you're not ready for them to die, we're going to do an intervention that's not comfortable. It is not comfortable to be on a ventilator or to be on BiPAP. It's not. But if you insist, the thing is that you're alive to sue us. And so healthcare practitioners are going to do what, that person says.
Mm.
Not right, but that's how it goes. And so then you're in this position of, okay, so we put them on the ventilator. Oh, this isn't getting better. This wasn't a good idea. Okay, can you take them off now? Well, now taking them off is this removing a piece of machinery that's keeping them alive. And that's a more kind of psychologically active thing of saying, now stop this thing that's breathing for them. That is so much harder. People thought it was hard saying, no, don't start that ventilator. I know he doesn't want it. I know this is the end of his life from his disease. Just let it be. That's hard. It's really, really hard to say that machine that's keeping him alive, turn it off.
Mm.
And so you're going to face two hard decisions. Like, kind of choose the one that is consistent with what the person wants and that does the least amount of harm, right? So it's like having these kind of conversations, and for our listeners to listen to these kind of conversations and to be able to say, okay, I understand that. But when you're right in the middle of that emotional thing, you're only thinking, oh my God, I don't want them to die right now.
Mm.
So these are things to think about in advance. That's why they call it an advance directive. You think about it in advance and you say, and then the person who doesn't want these things, who's choosing the person who's going to be their durable power of attorney, can then say, are you going to be able to not put me on the ventilator when I've told you I don't want to?
Mm.
And if you get the answer, well, I don't know, that would be really hard, then I think you should pick somebody else. Pick somebody who says, yeah, I'll do whatever you want. I mean, I won't like it. I'm durable power of attorney for a few people. It's like, I won't like it, but I'll do it because you're asking me to do that.
Yeah. It's got to be such a hard conversation while you're in the heat of the moment. And I can't imagine. And Simone kind of asked a question about this. She says it is much harder mentally. I think she's referring to the starting and stopping, but is it legally okay?
It's legally, absolutely, because the standard is there clear and convincing evidence? So if somebody has done their advance directive, then you can say, well, what does this advance directive say? You can pull that out and you can say, they said really clearly they don't want this. And so you give a copy to the physicians, to ICU team, whoever's there, and they can say, okay, we will honor their wishes, because that's what the decision is. Should we, do we know what they want, and are we going to honor it? And so that's how we protect ourselves. And that's how we can communicate when we can't communicate for ourselves. Now, I've had many times where I'm sitting talking to a patient, and a family member will come in and say, I'm the durable power of attorney, so you have to do what I say. I say, well, no, as long as she can tell us what she wants, that's what we're going to do. We're not going to say, oh, I'm going to listen to you, even though she's sitting right here and she's talking to us. So a durable power of attorney only kicks in when the person can't speak for themselves. As long as you're sitting there and somebody can say, hey, you're really having trouble breathing and you've got this end stage lung disease. Do you want us to put you on a ventilator? And they say no, then you make them comfortable and you stay with them and you use medicines that we can, so that people aren't really in distress because they're having trouble breathing. And you let the life end. It's called allowing natural death. It's like if it was 100 years ago and this situation happened, you wouldn't even have the good drugs we have now. It would be much more distressing. But now we can give drugs to manage the symptoms, to make people comfortable, to make them not suffer, and also not use technology that's not appropriate for the situation.
That makes sense. So one last question just to wrap things up. As we've talked about, all of these topics are so hard. They're really difficult, but that doesn't mean we should avoid them. And you founded Everyone Dies to help people have these conversations. So how do you feel education on topics like this can help us normalize these conversations?
I think knowledge is power, and that's not something I made up. I don't know who the original person is who said it. Might have been Socrates. I don't know. But knowledge is power. So if you go into a situation and you've never heard of artificial food and fluids, and what is it, and how do we know when we use it, and all of that, then your learning curve is like this. But if you come to like Everyone Dies, and we're in 5.5 years of weekly recordings, there's at least something for everyone there. But there is one on, let's say, artificial food and fluids. You could listen to that and you could say, oh, I understand what they're talking about. And then there's resources, and you can read more about it if you want to, or if you've got an understanding of it, you could say, well, when I'm in this situation, I will know what to do. I'll know what they're talking about. And so it makes you a better consumer, because we're consumers of healthcare, if we like to think of ourselves as that or not. We make a decision what doctor we're going to go to, what we're going to be willing to do, what all of those things. So if we educate ourselves, and you can do it driving in your car, or anywhere that you can listen, you can take a walk and learn something new. Not that everything that we talk about happens to everyone, but everyone will die. And so what's the situation for the disease that you have, or the family dynamics that you have, or if your dog died, like how do I deal with this grief over my dog? Well, there's actually a few podcasts about that, to see, like, what are the issues? And you listen, you say, oh, that's true, I never really thought about it like that. So it's like learning about anything is like, take advantage of the opportunity to make yourself an educated consumer, so that when you're in the situation, you can say, I know what I'm consenting to. I understand what I'm consenting to. This is really what I want, or this is really what I don't want.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great way to sum it up, that knowledge is power. And the more we talk about it, the easier it'll be. It'll never be easy, but it will get easier.
Well, at least, like with the tomato soup cake and my sister, at least when they only take a bite, when you spend all afternoon making something, you're not going to get mad at them.
Yes, exactly.
Going into it, she's only going to eat a bite, but it'll be worth it to make
Absolutely.
that for her,
Yeah, definitely. And that's a memory now that you get to carry with you, and a happy moment for you both. So
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been so helpful for me to understand. I think that the knowledge is power. I just learned so much that will equip me if I'm ever in a circumstance where we have to think about this with a loved one. And I'm sure our viewers learned a lot. And if you're watching this and you want to learn more, remember you can visit Everyone Dies, listen to Dr. Marianne's podcast, and check out all the resources she has on their site. They're amazing. We also have a resource on seniorliving.org called the Caregivers Corner. This is a Facebook group for caregivers, so you can connect, you can share your experiences, and you can learn from experts on topics like this. So just know that you're not alone in this journey, whether you're just becoming a caregiver or you've been a caregiver for a long time. And we also have a course for caregivers. So if you're brand new to this whole thing and you're just trying to absorb as much information as you can, we have a beginner's course for you, just to learn all of the basics. And it talks about advanced care directives and a lot of the things we've discussed today. So just know, again, you're not alone. We are here to support you. And we'll be back next time. So please let us know if there are any other topics you'd like to cover. You can always leave us comments, requests, and all of that. So thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's good to see you all.